welcome you to the CISS webinar on India-China Face-Off, Territorial or Strategic. This is the third in our series of webinars on South Asian strategic and security issues. This webinar will proceed with the opening and welcome remarks of Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi. Let me introduce him first. Ambassador Naqvi possesses a profound diplomatic career of 36 years from 1970 to 2006, which culminated in senior ambassadorial positions at the United Nations, both in New York and Vienna, and in Washington, D.C., London, Paris, and Brussels. After his retirement from the Foreign Services, Ambassador Naqvi was appointed as a member of Chairman's Advisory Council at the Pakistan Atomic Energy Agency and worked as an advisor to the Chairman PAC on international affairs with a particular focus on IAEA matters. Ambassador Naqvi is presently serving as the founding executive director of CISS. He established CISS in 2010 with an objective of promoting a better understanding between Pakistan and the international community on Pakistan's foreign policy and nuclear affairs. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Riaz. Before I begin my comments and remarks, I'd like to welcome Mr. Amar Bilal Sufi, who has joined us, and we greatly appreciate his presence.
Thank you very much, Naqvi Sahab.
Well, all worthy participants and friends of CISS, I welcome all of you, particularly the eminent speakers from Pakistan as well as a speaker from India, who will be sharing their valuable insights on the various aspects of this important subject. From India, we have the privilege of having the well-known and highly regarded defense analyst, Mr. Praveen Sawhney, the editor of Force magazine. Having heard his recent video presentations, as I was telling him, on this topic, it will be our great pleasure to hear him speak today on this subject and give us his perspective. Then we have our own Pakistani speakers, General Naeem Lodi, Mr. Amar Bilal Sufi, and Dr. Fazlur Rahman, all three of them known for their expert insight into the topics that they would be speaking on. I may mention here that we had a Chinese speaker, Professor Guo from the Kunming University, but he had some urgent matter, some meeting that had come up, and he is unable to join us. Dr. Fazlur Rahman is a China expert and will be able to give us a good presentation. Center for International Strategic Studies is grateful to all the speakers for their acceptance of our invitation to participate in this discussion. Not the least, we greatly appreciate all the audience participants who will be invited to take part in the interactive Q&A session after the presentations by the worthy speakers. I'll make a few remarks to begin with and to set the ball rolling. In the first place, the history of the India-China border contestation is old and goes back a long time. For one, there is no agreed border between these two big neighbors, and there is a reason for it. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the border between the two countries was based on treaties drawn up between the British Empire, the suzerain power of British India, and the weak Qing dynasty emperors who gave away their rights over the areas as desired by the British. After India became independent, it laid claim to the areas that the British India government had considered its own. Secondly, the terrain was inhospitable and often inaccessible, which supported a status quo situation. However, when the People's Republic of China assumed power, it looked at this disadvantageous state of affairs and reclaimed areas that were traditionally and historically Chinese territory and in their view did not belong to India. Due to the differing perceptions of the border, no agreement could be reached, and the matter was temporarily settled by agreeing upon a line of actual control, LAC, which is in effect even to this day. The flip side of this arrangement was the fact that it was inherently prone to occasional border disputes. Fast forward to recent developments. Two recent territorial disputes have occurred between India and China, leading to a conflict situation in Doklam in 2017 and recently in Galwan Valley in May 2020. And in fact, it started even before that in the late winter, early spring of this year. One reason for the Galwan Valley dispute is Indian revocation of Articles 370 and 35A of its constitution and the removal of the special status of the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir and its consequent incorporation of the state into the Indian Union as territories of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. This opened up a Pandora's box, as this step violated UN resolutions on Kashmir, in which Pakistan is also a party, the effective annexation of Kashmiri territory and its incorporation into Indian territory entailed an unauthorized change of the status of a disputed area and hence considered by Pakistan illegal under international law. Secondly, it caused concern in China as it does not consider Ladakh as Indian territory and claims ownership of the area under customary law as manifest in usage and tradition. These border disputes are also due to the fact that conflict between China and India are not only territorial in nature, but also have a strategic dimension. The burgeoning Indo-US partnership, the Quad security grouping, and rivalry in the Indian Ocean are all aspects of this situation. It also has implications for Pakistan due to Indian annexation of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. India's ongoing course appears to adopt a confrontational approach towards two nuclear armed neighbors. This standoff and the situation resulting therefrom has serious political and diplomatic implications for the strategic stability of this region. I will stop here and request the worthy speakers to consider all these aspects of the subject and present their learned perspective on the issue. I wish all the participants a productive and fruitful session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Riaz.
Thank you, Ambassador, for a great overview to get this discussion going and in terms of what we should be having in the back of our mind as we get into what will be an important but a very complex discussion. We have a highly distinguished panel as introduced by Ambassador Naqvi, a panel of speakers from Pakistan and India. Each panelist will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes and then we will have the question and answer session at the end. As the first speaker, we are honored to have Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodhi, who will offer his interpretation of India's military posture along the LOC and line of actual control. Lieutenant General Naeem Lodhi is a renowned defense analyst. General Lodhi was commissioned in the Army in 1974. He has a bachelor's in engineering. Naeem Lodhi is a graduate of Command and Staff College, Quetta and National Defense University, Islamabad. He has served on various command, staff and instructional assignments in his career in the Army, including the important appointments of directing staff at the National Defense College, now National Defense University, Islamabad, Commander of Engineering, Director General, Engineering Directorate, Director General Staff Duties Directorate, and General Officer Commanding Bahawalpur GS2 Rawalpindi and Corps Commander Bahawalpur. On account of his distinguished military service, he has been conferred the award of Hilal-e-Imtiaz. Naeem Lodhi has also served as the Defense Secretary and Minister of Defense in the interim government. Over to you, sir. And excuse me, sir, 1 minute. For all of you out there joining and tuning in, if you have a question that you would like to pose to the panel, you can post it at any time to the Q&A box at the Zoom app or the comment section on Facebook under the live stream video. With that, I turn the mic over to Mr. Lodhi.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you, CISS, and thank you, Ambassador Naqvi, for allowing me to be a part of such a distinguished panel. As this standoff between India and China has been talked about so much, so what I intend doing is just gloss over some of the reasons of this standoff at international level, at regional level, and then also try to say a few words about what actually physically has happened and what are the implications as we, today's topic is whether it is a territorial thing only or it has created some strategic effects. So I'll just take some time on that. As far as the international level is concerned, international environment is concerned, we know very well that there's the Indo-US nexus about the containment of China. It is not hidden, it's very obvious. And there are strategic treaties between India and US, and some of them are very important, such as logistic treaty using each other's logistic installations, the communication agreement, and interoperability, which those of us who have served in army, they understand that how important is this aspect, that if two armies or two, let us say, militaries, they decide to have an interoperability, that means a lot, and it requires a lot of coordination and equipment coordination and all that. So that we all know. And second is the Indo-Pacific security arrangement in the name of Quad, and now Quad Plus. Japan, Australia, India, and America, and now 2 or 3 more countries being added to it. Probably Vietnam and other countries also. So we understand that that the same sort of competition is going on there also. So naturally, this creates a tension between India and China for obvious reasons, without going into details. And then, as Ambassador Naqvi mentioned, whatever happened recently or a recent past, Doklam, Bhutan, Nepal, I don't have to go into the details. But I think the thing which actually initiated from where I think the things became more critical, one was of abrogation of 370 and Ladakh becoming a union territory. But more than that, claim of India on Aksai Chin, which they said is a part of Kashmir. And we all understand that there's a very strategic road which passes through Aksai Chin, which joins Tibet and Xinjiang as far as China is concerned. So that must be very alarming for China. Then they were threatening notes about CPEC, and CPEC we all understand is a flagship portion of their BRI thing, and that meant that although I will explain later on also, some of us think that CPEC is very close to Daulat Beg or something. It is not like that, but still, talking about Gilgit-Baltistan being a part of Kashmir and CPEC passes through that. So that was also, I think, alarming for China. Then there were other small things. We call it salami tactics, where things were some infrastructure development was going on quite imperceptibly. As far as the main road from Leh up to Daulat Beg is concerned, I think that was all right, although it was very close to this LAC. But then we heard that there were certain lateral also being developed, maybe towards Gavlan Valley or elsewhere. So that would have also alarmed the Chinese. They were watching all this. So as a combination of all this, I think the things happened, whatever happened, and we know that there were 3-4 important places from where Chinese moved forward. The Gavlan Valley being one of them, and the lake, which is Pangong Lake, another, and the 2 other points which were important, and all were actually meant, if we look at the geography, to come closer to this road, to oversee this road, to control this road, which goes to the base Daulat Beg, which is only about 8 kilometers from Karakoram Pass. And Daulat Beg initially was, I think, a smaller base, maybe a battalion base, and later on converted into a brigade base. And then, of course, it also they developed the airstrip, and it was further expanding. So that was also, we all know that Karakoram Pass is on the border of China and India, and it also leads to Siachen. And from there onward, of course, Indians, if they so see, they can oversee the area of Sikardu and from where this, the road passes, the CPAC road and all that, although quite far away, but still. So these were some of the things which led to all this. Whatever happened, we all know, not much of, territorial exchange, I would say 8 to 10 kilometers coming down the valley and occupying certain heights is not strategic in nature as far as the physical movement is concerned. I mean, I would call it tactical. Maybe somebody can, label it operational, not more than that. But yes, its impacts could be strategic, because now if Chinese forces can oversee this road and can interdict it with artillery fire or with whatever other resources, so that has brought a big change as far as the situation in this area is concerned. However, more important is the buildup of the forces. If we look at the images, satellite images, we see that China, this small movement, which we may call it tactical or operational, it is backed up by very good preparations behind the, as in the bases, and there's some, we can see that a good number of forces are there and all that. Yes, it has also attracted Indian forces, and Pakistan at times, feels very good that, some Indian forces will be, we can say, locked down there in that area. Okay, that is good enough. But yes, the only thing Pakistan could be happy about is that now it will be difficult for Indians to make any more ingresses into Siachen or towards Kargil, or even thinking of, attacking in that area along those routes going up to Sikardu, or trying to threaten CPAC road. That has become difficult. But beyond that, I think not much has changed. And if we look at what can happen in future, I think after Prime Minister Modi saying that they have not occupied our territory, I don't blame him, because I think there was a buffer zone between where the Chinese forces were and where the Indian forces were, staged or stationed. And if some of that area which was buffer initially has now been occupied, so one can say that not much Indian territory has been occupied. But I think Swami Saab later on can tell us more about it. So as far as the future is concerned, in my humble opinion, Chinese would like to de-escalate. And so would like the Indians. Because whatever happened has happened. Chinese may, go back from other places, but I don't think they will leave the heights which they have occupied in the Gawalan Valley or elsewhere, from where they can oversee this road, oversee this base, Daulat Beg. They will not give up as far as that is concerned. Of course, they can, for the negotiation's sake, for give and take, they might, retreat from other areas. For example, if from Finger, as far as this lake is concerned, if they go back to Finger 5 or Finger 6, and they do not allow, Indians to go beyond Finger 4. So that could be one give and take, not much of importance. But the important areas, the tactical heights which they have occupied, they are not going to leave. Now, what impact it has on the overall situation in Kashmir? I think the best indicator is the recent, meeting of foreign ministers of Pakistan and China, and their joint statement. You must have noticed that China tried to keep herself out, and they said that Kashmir is a disputed territory between Pakistan and India. And they never mentioned themselves. They never said that we are also a party. So that expectation which Pakistan was having, that now probably China will also become a party, and now Kashmir has more number of parties, probably that might not happen. at least not apparently. As far as, otherwise, things keep happening. I cannot say that. So what I see, that things will settle down as status quo. Whatever has happened has happened. Some small retreats may take place, but this overseeing of the Chinese, forces of this road and this base, that is going to stay, which creates, gives some, you can say, safety as far as Siachen is concerned, as far as Kargil is concerned, as far as CPEC is concerned, to an extent. And any attack in that direction is now not really possible as far as Indian forces are concerned. That gives some relief to Pakistani strategists also. They have some, you can say, better environment. If we also add to it whatever resistance movement is going on in Kashmir, and if the Chinese forces, the way they are plonked there in the Ladakh region, and if we have to face any, as India keeps on saying that they will attack Azad Kashmir, if that happens, I think Pakistan will be in a very good position to respond very strongly and very effectively because of these factors that I've mentioned. I'll stop here, and then other things we can cover in the question answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Lodhi, for those instructive comments and military perspective on the India-China border dispute. Just a reminder for those of you listening, if you have a question for the panelists, you should post it in the Q&A box on the Zoom app or comment section on Facebook. Now let's move over to another worthy speaker, Amir Bilal Sufi, to hear his legal perspective on the episode of the China-India face-off. Mr. Sufi holds an LLM in international law from the University of Cambridge. He is the founding president of the Research Society of International Law and the senior partner of a law firm, ABS & Co., with offices in both Islamabad and Lahore. He often represents Pakistan as an expert in international law matters, providing, for example, legal counsel before the International Court of Justice, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, and International Chamber of Commerce. Over to you, sir. You are on mute, sir. Please unmute.
Yes, I have unmuted. Thank you very much, Riaz. It's indeed an honor to be part of such an illustrious panel. I think I would be brief in terms of this issue, because the legal issues are mostly highlighted in certain sense, but from an international point of view, what is happening in line of actual control, LAC, between India and China, partly is a concern for Pakistan, because the recent developments of the last year of 5th August have clearly tipped the balance in terms of what we call here a lawfare offensive on the part of the Indian side, whereby they have not only hollowed out Article 370 and 35A, but also have laid a territorial claim on the territories on the Pakistani side. So in that sense, it is clearly a legal offensive. But on the Chinese side, what I notice when I go through the material or the legal material is a constant status quo on the way forward to determine the title relating to the territorial overlapping claims. For the last 50 years plus, India and China are unable to come to certain consensus, neither agree on a venue, nor agree on the terms of reference for determining the overlapping of the claim. This is a very typical situation. It happens in various countries, amongst various countries, between various countries, when you have claims that overlap each other's territory. So what India and China have been doing almost in all three sectors, central sector, eastern sector, western sector, have been to freeze these claims the way they exist. They have been entering into periodic agreements for maintenance of boundary, for ensuring there is no smuggling of wildlife, there is no smuggling, there is no other transfer of arms or any other contrabands and so on and so forth, and assisting either side on livestock movements, on individual movements. But that is just like managing a dispute. So whether it's the 93 agreement or 96 agreement and the one as recently as 2013 agreement, they all indicate that the dispute about the territorial overlapping of claim has been, yet we are managing the border the way it exists. So this kind of a tension which has been witnessing, which we are witnessing now, was something that was due. It had to happen. Sooner or later, it had to spill beyond mere management of the claim relating to the territory. I think time has come when India and China need to have a discussion on the way forward for determination of this claim. It's a very formal exercise. It cannot be done diplomatically. It cannot be done through web seminars. It cannot be done through issuing statements, because each statement that India issues or China issues are statements which are asserting their claim vis-a-vis the line of control and the way they look at it. Now, the legal basis that China has is completely a different set of facts, starting from Manmohan line, whether they agree to it, whether they don't agree to it, the legal basis for not agreeing to it, and then, of course, the Indian version, where they rely on certain maps to argue this area belongs to us and this line and its demarcation and its delimitation is something that needs to be done. In my experience, I've seen such matters which are essentially of overlapping claims are better settled in ad hoc by experts, by referring to some global experts. It could be through an international arbitration. It could be through ad hoc.
I think we have a connection issue on part of Emerald Saab's side. I think we have lost him.
I think now it's, I'll just kind of summarize. I hope I'm being heard by the concerned. Okay. So what I'm saying is, okay, fine. There's some disturbance, I believe, but anyhow. So what I was saying is that while India and China have parked the absolute settlement of the territorial dispute for the last 50 or 60 years, and they have been going down the route of just managing it by entering into periodic agreements relating to use of force, relating to transit rights, relating to wildlife, relating to movement of smuggled goods and so on and so forth, and preventing them, which is the regulatory aspect of the border. But truly the title determination, when is who, which place belongs to whom, is actually an exercise in which the title has to be determined. Now, unfortunately, neither side can determine this on its own. And we now see that tension coming up to a certain level where India insists that this is an area, whether we are talking of the lake, whether we're talking of the western border, whether we're talking of Nepal. And then there are regional countries which have their own version. So each version is in conflict with the other version. There is a historic context to that, and then there is a legal context to that. Now, the problem with this kind of a situation is it can't be sorted out through statements, through diplomatic channels, or through any other seminars or track two discussions. It has to be sorted out technically, because if I recall a lot of matters which have gone to whether it's International Court of Justice or ad hoc arbitration or specialized experts were commissioned, whereby both the sides or all other associated sides put across to that tribunal the legal evidence of the exercise of executive authority that a state has been doing in a certain area. And that executive authority exercise eventually determines the title. So whether it was run of Kutch arbitration between India and Pakistan, in which we had a Kutch area, which was marshy area. So Pakistan and India both presented proofs, evidence of a nature arguing that the tribes who go take their um, goats and cattle for grazing have greater link to Pakistan. Even the language that they were speaking was also made use of as legal evidence. So what I'm saying here is that it's a 4,000 kilometer border, 3,000 plus or something like that. It's a huge border. This is just 2 or 3 flashpoints that are being noticed right now. It has to be addressed comprehensively. And if it is addressed comprehensively, then we will be in a position to better associate ourselves on how we need to manage that. For that, in my view, both India and Pakistan and this regional countries need to make an effort to identify a forum where all these territorial claims can be laid for adjudication. Now that venue could be the ICJ, so all the countries can say, well, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, China, India, with the restricted terms of reference for the tribunal to say, well, we want to lay our evidence, our respective evidence over the last 70 years to demonstrate that this area belongs to us and this area belongs to us. Alternatively, SCO could also form a special tribunal for fact-finding or determination, or any other forum for that matter, because the principles relating to determination of territorial sovereignty are pretty well laid down in multiple cases in international law. So I would basically argue before this August panel that what we are witnessing right now, which can spiral out of control in terms of creating a serious threat to international peace and security for the entire region and for the entire world, to avoid that, we should make an effort to make a recommendation that this matter should be adjudicated upon from a judicial venue or a venue which can entertain the evidence, material, documentation, state practice from the Indian side, from the Chinese side, and then say, well, the demarcation and delimitation on the ground will follow the following, and relying on the principle will follow this and that from point X to point Y. So I think this would be my brief submission to this panel for the time being. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Sufi. A terrific presentation indeed. Thank you for enlightening us on the legal aspects of the China, India, Pakistan boundary areas. Let's turn to our another worthy guest, Praveen Sahni. After taking, let me introduce him first. After taking a premature retirement from the Indian Army, Mr. Sahni pursued a journalistic career and remained associated with different newspapers, including the Times of India and the Indian Express, and was a South Asia correspondent in New Delhi with Jane's International Defense Review and Jane's Information Review for 6 years. He was also a visiting fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, London, and a visiting scholar at Sandia National Laboratories, US. Mr. Sahni writes on strategic defense and foreign policy issues and contributes a regular column in the Force magazine, of which he is also a co-editor with Ghazala Wahab. Mr. Sahni has authored 2 books, The Defense Makeover, 10 Myths That Shape India's Image, and Dragon on Our Doorstep, Managing China through Military Power. He also co-authored a book with V.K. Sood on Operation Paragram, The War Unfinished. Mr. Sahni, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me start with saying that the event of 5th August 2019, it has had a cascading effect geopolitically and militarily. And that is what I want to talk about. But before I get to that, the key thing is the present military situation. I believe that both the disengagement and the de-escalation is an extremely, extremely difficult proposition today. And the reason I say that is because the situation is very complex. If there are any further queries on the complexity, in any case, I'm doing a video on this tomorrow, but I'll be happy to answer the questions here as well. Now, so what, in my opinion, India and China need to do is that earlier thing of having overall ties, relations will not work any further. But it should not be a zero-sum game as well. So what both sides need to consider seriously is a principled engagement. This is my recommendation to diffuse the present situation, a principled engagement that perhaps can diffuse the situation a bit, but again, it will be very temporary because the situation is very complex. Now, coming to the geopolitical implications of this. The first geopolitical, you see, there is a geopolitical regional implication, there is a geopolitical, if not a global, certainly an implication in the relations between India and the US. Even that is there. So let me start by saying that we would have noticed that since the problem started in May, it came to surface on the 5th of May onwards. It's been 3 months now. And there is now a bit of a distance between India and Nepal. There is a bit of a problem between India and Bangladesh. And one is not very sure about India's relations with Bhutan for the time being, as to how that will go. And this has serious implications. Anybody can see the map and see how the land routes are going, and everything becomes very obvious. The other thing what has happened is that all this talk of Quad, talk of, General Lodi made some very good points about interoperability, which I just want to dwell a bit more. But before that, the talk of Quad, and especially the talk of Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been led by the Donald Trump administration, they will also suffer, if not a setback, but a review because of what has happened, because what was being projected as a possibility doesn't seem to be happening, because there is a lot of muscle flexing that the PLA has managed to successfully do. So even that will get affected. Now, other thing that will get affected, in my opinion, is the Belt and Road as well as the CPEC. They both will get hastened up now, in my opinion, with very serious implications for India. And the implications are, as we have noticed, in the last 3 months, the political engagement between Pakistan and China has become regular, intensive, and very open. And we have also noticed that the military interaction, which is called interoperability, in my opinion, is hastening up now between the two countries, especially as it was rightly pointed out after the visit of Foreign Minister Qureshi meeting with Wang Yi and the joint statement. I think that joint statement needs to be read very carefully in India because it's a very sufficiently serious matter, the joint statement. Now, here is the key thing. If we just go above the military situation right now, what we see happening is, with all India's neighbors now realizing that it is better to be more closer in the BRI. So I see the digital Silk Road and I see the space Silk Road. See, the digital Silk Road is the key element of the BRI or the CPEC. Infrastructure is good, yes, it is required. But the key thing, and where China has a lead right now, and it will definitely want to add up to that lead. And how you add up to the lead is by creating e-commerce. So what they will try and do is, they will bring in First of all, a digital revolution in all these small countries. It's all happening. You see, the fiber optic cables have been laid, submarine cables have been laid by the Chinese, by Huawei in Bangladesh. They are already there in Pakistan. So when you join up these things, you join up the cables, and you see the space Silk Road coming up, the Beidou system being already here, the global system activated this year with complete 35 satellites. You see the arrival of the fourth industrial revolution. It is the age of artificial intelligence, and what the Chinese will get is they will get a lot of data. And data is the oil for artificial intelligence. That is what runs it, which means that they will have a leg up. They will have a first mover advantage in all these countries' industries, where automation and robotics I expect to come in the next 5 to 10 years. It will all be done, and it will get hastened primarily because of that. So what I'm talking of is about prosperity. So once prosperity comes and India is unable to do a principal engagement with China, as I said, then suddenly India is, as I draw the scenario, there is a possibility that we will see ourselves marginalized by way of trade and commerce in our own neighborhood. So that is not a very good situation to be in. So that is one of my key points that I wanted to make. Now, insofar as the situation, as I said, is concerned, you see, the biggest complexity here is that everything has come out in the open. How it has come out in the open is that India says it has a border with China, which is 3,488 kilometers. And Chinese, as back as December 2010, they had declared that our border with India is only 2,000 kilometers. So that missing 1,488 kilometers is Ladakh. So basically, the British India never had a border, a delineated or a demarcated border with China, with Tibet then. And today also there is no border. What we had was the line of actual control. So there is a big problem in the line of actual control that India is advocating and what the Chinese are insisting upon. So this is what makes the situation complex. But I just want to keep myself very brief on this for the time being. Happy to get into the question answer sessions. A bit about interoperability. You see, my understanding of interoperability always has been that it has 4 elements. The first element is there is a need for a commonality of equipment. Number 2 is there is a need for a assured operational support to that equipment. And number 3 is that identification of an enemy and dovetailing, having common doctrines. And the 4th point, which is absolutely critical, is joint training. Something that we see in terms of Shaheen exercises going on in a designated area. So you see, insofar as India and US are concerned, it's all open literature. There's nothing to hide. Nobody has gone even beyond stage 1, which is commonality of equipment. Even there are problems, because something we buy from the Russians, the Americans object that the moment you try and put this into your system, there is a possibility that it'll end up, the Russians will end up knowing about it. You see that secrecy clauses, they start coming in. So when a country like India, unless it becomes self-sufficient in its industry, defense industrial complex, it is not possible to have, first of all, to say that we are a major power without a defense industry doesn't work. Then on top of that, if you start getting equipment from America and Russia, which have their own positives, very strong points, then it is very difficult to mesh them up. So you see, this interoperability to me seems a very sort of a far cry, which I don't think will happen anytime soon. In fact, I may just end by saying that I remember when uh, Admiral Harry Harris was the pack commander, he had come to Delhi. He was very kind enough to give me an hour. In fact, I and my colleague Ghazala Wahab, we met him for a formal interview, and then we ended up having a very long chat. And I asked him, I said, Admiral, what is it that you are looking at? And I'm talking of something like, I'm talking of a decade ago, about 2010 or 2011, I'm talking of. I asked him, you see, this interoperability or this thing has been going on since 1992, when the Americans, after the demise of the Soviet Union, first proposed it to the Indian side. So they are very keen on it. But as I said, to digress a bit, now they will be having a bit second thoughts after Ladakh. This is the way I read it. Now, so I asked him, I said, Admiral, what are you looking at? He says, we are eventually looking at common joint patrols. Now that is interoperability. Because the moment you talk joint patrols, you are looking at same equipment, communications, you are looking at assured support, you are looking at common doctrines, and you're looking at training, doing a joint combat. So that is not happening at all. That is for sure. So I think I'll pause here, and then I'll be happy to take on things later on. Thank you. Thank you, Riaz.
Thank you, Mr. Sahani, for the illustrative account of India's position in the different aspects of the relationship between India, China, and also India, Pakistan. And now, please note that the Chinese scholar could not join us, as Ambassador Naqvi pointed out at the start. And we are sorry that we could not get to listen to a Chinese perspective on the China-India border dispute, but we have here a Pakistani scholar with expertise on China and its foreign relations, Dr. Fazlur Rahman. Sir, we genuinely appreciate your time and for agreeing to speak at the webinar on such short notice.
Thank you very much, Riaz. It's a pleasure to be part of the panel. And can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir?
आपकी आवाज आ रही है? अभी तो आ रही है, ठीक.
Right. So I would like to thank Ambassador Naqvi for having provided me with this opportunity to. There's some kind of disturbance coming from someone's mic. So thank you very much, Ambassador Naqvi, for providing me with this opportunity to share my thoughts with this August panel. I have the disadvantage of being the last speaker. Actually, the subject has been very adequately covered by very eminent speakers. General Lodi and yourself and Swani Saab has very aptly dealt with all the aspects. So I would like to, without repeating myself, I would like to focus only on those aspects which I think have either been missed out or not have been focused adequately. One thing is that we should look at the timeline also, that how this development has evolved. First is that when in last August, the Indian Parliament repealed Article 370, and as a consequence of that, there has been a lot of protest from Pakistan, and the Chinese also at the same time got alarmed about the status of Ladakh, because they have very vital and very deep strategic interest in the status, the legal status, and the administrative status of these areas. So that was kind of a starting point where the radars started shifting onto this region. Although this issue of infrastructure development has been going on for some time, and there has been protestation and concerns and apprehensions on both sides of the border regarding the construction of infrastructure. And gradually, when in April, this there has been some kind of a speedy construction of road network, then there had been more concerns and alarms expressed. And then we see that by June, this thing really blown up in a physical conflict, in a physical fight between the soldiers of the two countries. We should also not forget that this is a COVID period, and it started sort of late last year, and it is the high time. It was the high time when this momentum of this situation started developing. So in my opinion, I think the strategic nuance behind these kind of gesturing was to create multiple challenges for China. China was already facing a very severe, grave challenge in its relations with the US, which is kind of a Cold War-like situation, although not a Cold War, but it's more or less it has some similarities in that context, and it is evolving. It is expanding and it is deepening. The US interests in withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. That is again one aspect in which perhaps the US presence in this region could have been replaced by the Indians or the Indian strategic outreach in the region. So that was again, a strategic interest of the Indian side to present itself to the US that, sort of in your absence, perhaps we will be able to manage the regional affairs. And at the same time, we also see the developments which were taking place in the South China Sea region, which were again posing a kind of a threat. And General Lodi has mentioned about the Quad and about the emerging tensions in the region. So while we look at all these aspects or the developments all around this region, one finds that why the two sides, especially the Indian side, has chosen this time. It's perhaps kind of an opportunity that the Indians thought that China is under tremendous pressure, and perhaps this is the time that we can also exert some pressure in order to get kind of a deal to get China agreeable to decide upon the boundary issue, or to resume some kind of a dialogue or a meaningful dialogue, because the dialogue has been taking place for years now without any concrete results. But somehow there has been some confidence building measures, which the two sides have taken in order to maintain some kind of semblance of stability on the line of actual control, and not allowing the things to really get out of hand and to reach a stage where it can really threaten the peace and security of the region. But now, perhaps in the last 1 or 2 months, we are seeing that the situation is getting worse from bad. And I think yesterday or day before yesterday's statement of the Indian Army chief regarding that if the diplomacy and if the negotiations fail, then there could be a military option to solve the problem. So if this is kind of the understanding which is being presented from the Indian side, and the Chinese side is kind of persistent on its stance that they would like to see this LAC peaceful, and they would like to remain within their own domains where they are. So in that context, I think as Swani Sahib has very rightly mentioned, that it's becoming very difficult for the two states to reconcile at this point in time. However, there is definitely a need for a very meaningful engagement, and if that doesn't take place, there is a possibility that this could become a trigger point, not kind of a major conflict between the two here, but it could have implications in the South China Sea. Also, another important aspect which is related to this situation is the heightening sentiments in both the countries against each other. So at popular level, at mass level, you see protestation, you see resentment, you see anger, you see If you look at the, sort of Indian talk shows and the way they, portray China and the way they want to deal with this situation, I think it will become increasingly difficult in both the countries for the political leadership or the decision makers in the two countries to make way forward or to look forward to kind of enter into meaningful engagement. So again, I think the nature of warfare is also, sort of changing. And all these infrastructure built up, which is being constructed on both sides of the border, can be dismantled, without physical engagement from a distance, like in no time. So one has to really, both the countries and especially the decision makers should keep all the possibilities and the aspects in mind while they are dealing with the situation. And the third aspect is that, we are really not aware of the impact of post-COVID-19 economic global situation and regional situation. I think both the countries have been affected by this pandemic, and the economies of the two countries have suffered a great deal, and the possibilities of a speedy recovery is not sort of very evident, especially in the case of India. China has largely been moving on a recovery track, sort of very fast, but on the Indian side the situation is still very dismal. So keeping all these things, there is now a pattern which we see that the Indians are trying to follow on the footsteps of the Americans, that they are trying to now disengage economically or in terms of businesses with Chinese companies. We have the case of TikTok, we have sort of some other cases of IT companies and some telecommunication companies. So if that be the case, perhaps this is going to hurt both the countries in a very negative manner. And as a consequence of that, it will also create bigger and deeper tensions in South Asia. And the South Asian countries, as has been mentioned earlier on, especially look at Bangladesh, look at Nepal, Bhutan is on the verge of drifting towards China. So all these developments are going to create more problem and frustration, especially in India, and it will be very difficult for the Indian leadership to tackle all these kind of domestic pressures and the external pressures and the regional geopolitical environment. So with this, the remaining I leave for the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rahman, for providing your view of Beijing position and your perspective on the China-India border dispute. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. Let's go to the questions that we collected from the audience. So the first question is directed to General Lodhi. It's from Mr. Abdul Basit Wani. Sir, you touched on this aspect, but to just re-highlight this thing. So he's asking, how far is it correct that India-China face-off is a reaction to the scrapping of Articles 370 and 35A of Indian Constitution? You're on mute, sir.
Oh yeah, right. What I've understood is that question is asking that what is the impact of abrogating 370 and 35A on this thing? Naturally, it has an impact. There's no saying anything else about it. But along with it, asserting that Aksai Chin is a part. I mean, they could have lived without saying that, and then also threatening CPEC, which everybody knows is a very important thing for China. So yes, 370, of course, abrogation of 370 and making Ladakh union territory did irk China, but probably they would have kept quiet. Had they also not laid their claims on Aksai Chin, I mean, openly, and also talking about CPEC, probably this wouldn't have happened. And also there are so many others. I talked about the bigger factor, and I also talked about the smaller factor. There are factors smaller than this, and there are factors bigger than this. But yes, this also contributed. I agree to that.
Thank you, sir. Another question is directed to Mr. Pravin Saini. It's from Arif
I
Kamal.
would suggest one thing. Sorry, I would suggest one
He's
thing.
asking the Sino.
Just hold on, Riaz, for a minute. Whenever, because we have a friend from across the border also, so whenever there is a question which may, if he wants to chip in something, he should be asked also. If any question which relates to Indian thing, so I think you should also ask Swami Saab if he has to say anything about it, about 370, abrogation of 370.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Mr. Sani, you can also comment on the previous question as well. So I have a specific question for you here. The Sino-Indian standoff across LAC could possibly lead to a freeze on status quo or spark of negotiation for a provisional border in keeping with disputed status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I wonder if Pakistan-China border agreement of 1963, which is categorized as provisional, can serve as a model for them too. So if you could comment on this and the previous question.
Unmute your mic, sir.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So you see, this 1963 that you are talking about is something entirely different between Pakistan and China. What we have today is something where there are two lines of actual controls, where there are different claims being made by the two sides. So that is what makes it complex. Now, freezing this is not possible at all. It was better that it had not come to the fore. But now that it has come to the fore, the problem is not gonna get solved in a hurry. So which is why I said it's a huge problem which needs a talk by itself. It is not just about one line, it is to do with the implications, how it came from, where did it come from, where will it go. So the long and short of the whole story is that something has begun. It will not end today, it will end perhaps 10, 15 years from now. But what we have to, or rather both sides, India and China, have to consider is that how do we calm this problem for the time being, which is why I spoke of the principled engagement. We need to talk with one another at the highest political level. Only until we get into a principled engagement, a bilateral engagement, then we can, for the time being, say, all right, this is where we can leave it for the time being. But right now, the situation on both the sides is that they are not willing to give even an inch. They are not even willing to talk also to one another at the highest level. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is directed to Mr. Amir Bilal Sufi Saab. It's from Hamza Athar. So he's asking that as aforementioned about LAC of India-China border is not considered as an international border. So how international institutions can play a role in arbitration, whether ad hoc or any other type? Mr. Sufi, I think, is not here.
You can move to the next question.
So yeah, I have to move to the next question. It's for Dr. Rahman. You were speaking on the timing of India in this aspect. So I'm going to ask you about what are China's objectives, tactical or strategic, in making military inroads at multiple points along the western sector of Sino-Indian disputed border, and why this time around, since India has been building DSDB road for several years. And do you think China's military face-off in India relates to Beijing's change of Hong Kong law and other policy actions around? So three things: China's tactical or strategic objectives in the current face-off, and why this time in connection with China's overall policies. annexations?
I think that there has been, a lot of pressure which has been accumulated by US and its allies on China from all sides. And India being presenting itself as one of the, strategic partners of US, and especially in this region. So the Chinese are trying to secure its periphery, and they are trying to secure its borderlands, and they are trying to ward off the kind of pressure and the kind of instability which can stem from the issues which are existing on the border. So there has to be some kind of, measures taken. So it's in that regard that China is trying to take certain measures to safeguard its territorial integrity, its national interest, and its core national interest, which are being threatened by the US. So we have to, as I mentioned earlier on, that we have to look at it from a larger context and see the accumulated impact, the accumulated pressure which is being built, right at this point in time on China. But certainly, China will remain open for a meaningful negotiation, because the track record of China in terms of negotiations has been very good. They have been able to solve their border dispute with almost all of their neighbors, remaining barring a few, especially with India. But the possibilities do exist, and China would certainly like to take off pressure from this side, on its current situation, and especially economically, they would like to engage, because it's a manufacturing economy, and they would like to sell their products to India. India is a huge market. Then there are joint ventures in India. So if these things remain static and they do not move towards reconciliation, I think there's going to be a huge cost which will be paid by both the sides, and especially by India.
If I'm allowed to just add one or two sentences,
Sure.
we have seen that Chinese have shown a lot of patience as far as the resolution of disputes is concerned. They even tell us that you can put Kashmir on the back burner, although that is a different discussion altogether. So Chinese have a lot of patience, and Indians do not have the capacity to escalate. So Chinese, in my humble opinion, Chinese will not escalate because they don't have to get anything else by escalating. And India might not escalate because they are not capable of escalating. What I see some positivity in the whole scenario is that maybe Indians, because they are pragmatic people, with the passage of time, if some leadership comes up that pragmatically thinks that joining the regional initiative is much better than being a part of some distant force. And if they think of joining CPEC and then again rearranging their things with China and not playing to the American designs, I think things will improve a lot, and it will be a very good situation for the entire region, maybe.
Thank you, sir. I've got here two questions related to the US involvement. So first question is from Shafqat Rasool. So he is asking, India is buying S-400 system and Rafale jet. Is this a game changer for India? And what is the role of US standoff with China and India? What is the role of US in the China-India standoff? Is the US beyond this standoff? Can we say this is a Cold War between China and US? And another question is from Afira, from Praveen Saini. How could Congress deal with a crisis like this differently, and what are the common denominators of both Congress and BJP in dealing and negotiation with China? So these are directed to General Lodi and Praveen Saini.
I think first Swami Saab can say whatever. Muted.
Sir, you are on
Mike,
mute.
sir.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
So you see, I'm neither in Congress nor in BJP.
That is very good.
So how they will react, I have no idea. You see, now, insofar as this S-400 and Rafale you mentioned, You see, the thing is that one weapon platform never makes a difference at the operational level of war. It's a combination, and especially now the battle space has become very complex. Now we are talking about electromagnetic spectrum. The PLA is now working at the information denial. We are looking at an entirely different ballgame. The war that we are progressing towards, not essentially between India and Pakistan, certainly when India is pitted against China, is an entirely different thing. So one weapon system, S-400 or Rafale, you see, Rafale much will depend on that. The pilot training is important. How many Rafales are there? Your connectivity, your data links, then the control, your electromagnetic warfare, then is there any element of cyber warfare, basically your control over the electromagnetic spectrum, and then you talk about the platform is just a delivery system, and same thing goes for S-400. I mean, there are so many ways. You don't have to be a military man to understand that how it can be tamed. So not a big deal at all to just pick up a system. It really makes not much of a difference. Thank you.
I would only add, I will generally agree with whatever he has said. He's a great strategic brain. I would only say that yes, initially and immediately these things will not matter. I mean, in months or maybe a year time. But with the passage of time, once you do acquire the platform, then although it is working the other way around, but then these just the induction of these platforms might force you to integrate your systems and bring further integration with other systems and all that. So that can happen. So I would not say that it will not make a difference at all. It will make a difference, but maybe after some time.
Thank you, sir. I have another question from Dr. Mansoor. He's senior fellow at CISS. He's asking, in the wake of the ongoing India-China face-off, will it serve to fuel India's nuclear buildup to prepare for a two-front war scenario? Emerging counterforce capabilities in nuclear submarines and debate on India's nephew appears to point in this direction. This is directed to Mr. Saini.
Yeah, you see, can you hear me?
Gigi.
Okay. See, the thing is that now it's been 3 months. Nobody has heard the word nuclear being used. No Indian leader has mentioned nuclear. For that matter, the Indian Prime Minister and everybody, they've not even mentioned China word. So, see, nuclear, between India and China and between India and Pakistan, the real deterrence always is at the operational level of war, because we are not the countries which have nuclear weapons as part of their war fighting. So this is a Western concept, which is not our concept. Even between India and Pakistan, if nuclear weapons were to be part of war fighting, despite your full deterrence, proclamation, then what was the need for the Pakistan army, the Pakistan military, to always maintain a good balance at the operational level of war? Because that is where the war will start. Nobody is gonna use nuclear weapons in a hurry. I mean, nuclear weapons again are meant for deterrence. Now, what is deterrence? Deterrence is that the other fellow, your enemy, he should think 10 times before starting a war. That is deterrence. But between India and China, that has not happened, which means that at the conventional level, the PLA already had a deterrence. So where was the need to talk nuclear weapons? In fact, if you ask me 10 years, 15 years from now, with the disruptive and the artificial intelligence coming into the military domain, and at a very fast pace with the PLA, I would actually argue that something like cyber war, something like disruptive technologies, they will be the new deterrence in the coming age. The deterrence is not the nuclear weapons. We still have a lot of think tanks. We have nuclear experts here. Unfortunately, you see, this is what we have learned from the West. This is the Western theology of the NATO. You see, that big war, which was planned, nuclear weapons have to be there because the Soviets always had a preponderance of the conventional weaponry on ground. So the Americans wanted the nuclear weapons. So they went on with this mad theory and everything happened. We don't need that, all that. In fact, if you ask me if I may say the last word on this, the 1998 test done by the Bajpayee government, when I sit back and think now, in hindsight, was a mistake. India never gained out of it. It never enhanced our security and it never will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sophie is back, so I have a question for him. Sir, you mentioned in your Dawn article a couple of months ago, you mentioned that China has implemented a consistent policy to assert the executive authority of its government over the chunks of land it claims all along the length of the LAC, unquote. Are you referring to the Aksai Chin or the territories that are in India's control but contested by China? Can you explain the dimensions of legal sovereignty and executive authority in both India and China's cases?
So basically what I'm trying to say is that we need to do a little more research on the position of both sides. But if you look at the Chinese side, they have been consistent in terms of taking a position relating to the map and the previous line, which basically means that they have been relying on the argument of executive control and a better executive control and the continuing patrolling. And each time when there's a fight between two patrols, and if that fight is initiated from the Chinese side, it actually means that there is a legal assertion of that claim. If there is a pushback, whether mild or strong, if there is an enhanced patrolling of any area in eastern, central or western sector of the LAC, that basically is an evidence that a country is making this statement that it asserts its control over the territory. So the number of patrolling, number of incidences, if you put them on a matrix chart, you will be able to identify a consistency of state practice. And that I think will become quite instrumental when at some point both the countries sit and discuss weighing the claims against each other relating to demarcation and delimitation at a given spot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Fazlur Rahman, Abdul Basit is asking a question. How much is Pakistan involved in this India-China standoff, in taking the friendly relations of China-Pakistan into account? You're on mute, sir.
It's a matter of very deep concern for China and for Pakistan too, because Pakistan is a friendly country and we have also stake in this region, because whatever happens in that part would have implications for Kashmir issue also. So from that point of view, Pakistan has some stakes and interest in this issue. At the same time, we have just had a second round of strategic dialogue. Our foreign minister was in China, and both the foreign ministers discussed the regional security situation at length. And they have been all along calibrating their positions and their policies, which are mutually beneficial and serves the mutual interest of the two countries. So in a way, we are certainly, trying to understand and trying to focus on this situation. But at the same time, for the larger peace and stability of the region, it is, I think, in our interest too, to see this situation being diffused.
Allowed to just add, one, that this thing didn't happen because of Pakistan, this is for sure. And there can be no conspiracy theory that Pakistan and China, they together thought that something of that. No, not at all. Whatever has happened is neither good for China nor for India. But I won't say the same thing for Pakistan. I would say that it is not bad for Pakistan. At least CPEC has got some more security, one. And another big power is has been entangled into the Kashmir affair even more than before. That is what I would stop at.
Thank you, sir, both of you. This is a question directed to Mr. Pravin Saini and General Lodi. This is from Sama Sial. She is Senior Research Officer here at the CIS. After the recent face-off, how do you see the US-India relations evolving in the so-called Indo-Pacific region? Firstly, in the context of India as a bulwark, strategic bulwark against China, and secondly, with special focus to securing the so-called freedom of navigation and seas, this Indo-Pacific strategy. So how do you see US-India partnership playing out in the future? So this is directed to both. Mr. Pravin Saini may start first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So you see, first of all, Indo-US relations, they started in 1992. So the bottom line here is that they are evolving. Now, what complexion they'll take will depend on the next administration in America, whether Trump comes back or we have a Democratic administration there. So they will decide. And in any case, for America today, the biggest concern is not Indo-US relations, it is their relation with China. That is where they will focus on. Whether, I mean, I don't know what the Trump administration, if it comes back, what it will do, but certainly the Biden administration would want to focus on the relations with China because their problems have multiplied to the extent, if I may say, I will not be wrong, we can all look at a possibility 10 or 15 years from now of having two separate internets. It can be as bad as that, the tech war that is going on. Having said that, now freedom of navigation, this is still limited to the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. It has not really come into the Indian Ocean. So India really has no role to play, the Indian Navy has no role to play. This freedom of navigation is primarily being done by the Americans, by the US Navy. Now, what impact it is having, if I have to say, I don't think it is having much impact on the ground because the Chinese between 2014 and 2019 have done exactly what they wanted to do. They have reclaimed land, they have militarized the whole place, and freedom of navigation honestly hasn't worked. Yes, now the point is the strategic relations between India and US. Where are they headed? So as I said, first of all, it's a long relationship, but I see in the coming days, primarily because of this problem now which has come out in the open with China, I see a great possibility of India being a bit more, I mean, the Modi government obviously wants to go all out with the Americans. But I hope there is a bit of a sensibility and we see the possibility of better ties with Russia as well. That will be in India's interest. For the simple reason because Xi and Putin, they have very good ties with one another. So that is the future. So this partnership will stay. Thank you.
I would say that it is a great advantage for Americans to have such a great country like India to be their strategic partner in this region. Whether it is actually working today or not, that is besides the point. But the future competition between China and America is likely to escalate as we can see it. And Indian Ocean will be one of those regions where this competition will continue. So I think Americans will try their level best to keep this relationship intact. Although they must have been disappointed because of 2-3 factors. One, that the role that Americans wanted Indians to take on in Afghanistan, being a partner, being a very close partner, they did not get that. And Indians were very wise to not listen to them as far as what role they were asking. And we know that what they expected from India. Whatever has happened with China, again, they must not be very happy with the performance that Indians have shown. One thing we must realize, and the Indian leadership should also realize, and we should also know, and we are aware of it. Pakistanis are aware of it very much. Americans have a very, you can say, advanced ways of creating dissensions between countries where they want, and to create more friendships between countries where they want. And I'm talking of false flag operations. Americans can further aggravate the situation between China and India by using certain techniques at which they are very good. And I would suggest the Indian leadership to remain aware of that. But I am quite hopeful. If I look at the past of Indian strategic direction, their non-aligned, attitude, I have some hope that whenever some reasonable leadership emerges in India, they would like to integrate themselves with the region, with China, with Russia, with the countries around, more than America. And how far they will succeed, that has to be seen. That is my take. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, both of you. Now we have so many questions for Mr. Praveen Swaini. So this is the question from Memuna. Memuna Ashraf, she's also a senior research officer at CIAA. She's asking, following the Ladakh crisis, what are the prospects of horizontal escalation along the
Please keep your mic closer to your mouth, because
I can't hear you, Riyaz.
Sir, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can, please.
So this is a question from Memuna. Memuna Ashraf, she is a senior research officer at CISS. She's asking, following the Doklam and Ladakh crisis, what are the prospects of horizontal escalation along the other contested areas of India-China border, for example, Arunachal Pradesh? Is India expecting such a situation, and what will be the Indian response? So another question is also directed to Mr. Praveen Swaini, and General Lodi can also chip in, and Dr. Fazlur Rahman can also comment on it. This is, what are the terms under which China may agree to disengage or de-escalate with India? If India disagrees to such terms, are the two sides going for a long haul in Ladakh? Is India better prepared for such a long haul? How will prolonging this crisis may impact regional stability? Thank you, sir.
Can I answer first? Can I answer?
Gigi, go ahead, Swami sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you see, yeah, good questions. First of all, Doklam is very different from Ladakh. Doklam was for a separate reason altogether. Ladakh was a separate reason altogether, and I do not see the possibility of anything happening in Arunachal Pradesh. For the simple reason that whenever you do a military operation, any military does an operation, it doesn't do an operation because it wants to do an operation, because it has certain military objectives and political aims to be fulfilled. So they had a different political objective and aim in Doklam. They had something different in Ladakh. And I do not see in the near future anything happening in Arunachal Pradesh. That is the first question. Now the second is long haul. Ask any military whether they like it or not. If they have to be there, they will be there. So where is the choice in this of a long haul? They will be there. And insofar as disengagement and de-escalation is concerned, I just told you this is a very complex issue. It's a lot of details, involved in this. I do not see this happening in a hurry, because both sides seem to have taken a very firm position on this. Because for Prime Minister Modi also, it is important that he should not be seen to relent. And the PLA will not relent for their own reason, because you see, the very reason this issue started was, insofar as the PLA is concerned, because once the status quo was changed by India in Ladakh, India made Ladakh into a union territory, which they protested vehemently. The Chinese had protested. So they did the same thing. They changed the status quo in Ladakh on the ground. That is what they have done. And they're not going back in a hurry. Thank you.
General Lodi, you are on mute. Sir, you are on mute.
Gigi, thank you. I agree with him that there was a change of status quo from one side, and there was a response from the other side, and now there's a new status quo or new norm, normal, or whatever you may say. And in my opinion, of course, it will be a long haul in the sense that now both the forces will remain engaged here for a very long time. None of them can withdraw their forces. I'm talking about the backup forces. They will remain tied down, both sides. But I don't think any worthwhile action or any big movement which will change this situation is likely to take place in near future, because there is no human rights problem in this whole situation. Both sides can live with it, whatever has happened. I don't think that any further escalation is likely, because both sides don't want that. But at the same time, this will become the new normal, and any de-escalation is also de-escalation in that sense that the forces leaving that area and all that and thinning out, and that will not happen. So this, you can say, it will be a new normal, new status quo, and it is going to stay for some time.
Thank you so much, sir. We have
Riaz,
now.
Riaz, sorry interrupting you. Riaz,
Sure,
you
sir.
know, it's a delight being here. I have another appointment. So if you could excuse me, if it is possible to leave, because
Sure,
I
sir.
didn't know how long.
Thank you so much for your time.
So
We
I hope
are
it
very
is all
grateful.
right, Ambassador. I hope it is all right, Ambassador Naqvi. I hope it is all right. My leaving, please.
Ambassador Naqvi, sir, you are on mute.
Mike, sir.
Ambassador Saab.
Mr. Sawhney, it's a great pleasure indeed to have your presence and your participation, as well as a very masterly analysis of the situation with all its implications. In fact, whatever you say, and in your videos also, there are lots of things that we learn in listening to you. You have a perception and an insight which is really very valuable. So thank you indeed very much for having joined us, and we look forward to future interaction with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, General Lodi. Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, please note that Mr. Ahmed Bilal Sufi Saab has also left. He also said that he had a meeting somewhere. So now I have two questions. Now General Lodi and Dr. Fazlur Rahman may comment on them. What role of Russia and SCO organization play to normalize relations between China and India? And second question is from Adila, can India and the US succeed in promoting or spreading unrest in Xinjiang and Tibet? So Dr. Fazlur Rahman, if you may comment on either of the questions. Sir, you are on mute.
I think you should give first floor to General Saab and then I'll follow.
Okay, thank you. As far as Russia is concerned, I think it would be in Russian interest to have a sort of detente between China and India, because they have very deep relationships and economic interest connected with both the countries. So they would, and you must have seen that there was they even tried. They called that online conference of their foreign ministers and all that. So I think Russia will keep trying to play a role to dampen the situation between those countries, because they would like to have good relations with both of them. Although Russia is very keenly watching the Indian moves of moving towards America, and that they don't like, and they say it so openly. But we all understand, and of course, Excellence Ambassador Naqvi knows it very well, that in international relations, at times you have layers of relationships. Certain layers are under tension, and certain layers are quite good enough. So whether it is economic and political and military and people to people, so many layers of relationships are there. So it would be in Russian interest, in my opinion, to keep India away from America and keep it closer to China for as long as possible. So that sort of role they play. And the second question was about US trying to do what? I just
Unrest
missed
in
the second.
Xinjiang in Tibet.
They must already be trying to do it. I mean, if you look at these great paths, they don't become great just by through economics only. Remember that. Otherwise, if economy was the only criteria, Japan was #2 power for a very long time. Germany is no far away. So it is other provinces, other potentials which these countries have. For example, if I ask you that after Second World War, which has been the most warmongering country? Naturally, the number of wars they have fought and they have sent their troops, and which is also the richest country. So it is America. So it is not always that it is only the richness which the economic richness which brings your clout and your sway over various areas. There are so many other things, and this thing in which America is very good, changing of regimes, creating unrests, creating political blocks against other blocks and making their own political. They are very good in all that, and they have a brilliant success. If we say, how did the countries like Iraq and like Libya, and how did they succumb? And what is now happening in the countries around Russia? So they will do everything. That is you can say good thing about America, that once they go to war, they go for total war, and total war at times is non-kinetic also. So I have no doubts that they would be doing everything to create unrest in Xinjiang.
Yeah, I think that Russians would certainly be interested to, try to make up between India and China. Reason being that they are increasingly becoming under pressure from the US side, and US is targeting both China and Russia. Like they are just taking them as one, and strategically they are trying to now pressure their European partners to adopt the same kind of policies, on which we have seen that there is a fissure, and many major powers of Europe, they are not sort of in line with what the United States wants them to do vis-a-vis China and Russia. They would like to have more independent policies towards these two countries. However, at the same time, as has been rightly pointed out by General Lodi, that getting India too closer to US and trying to pursue the US agenda in the region would be counterproductive, for Russia and for China. So they would not like to see that. As far as the SCO is concerned, I think SCO has not really proven to the mark, where it can play a very meaningful role. All it can do is provide a platform or provide an opportunity on the sidelines for the leadership to meet and to discuss things. And now the summit has been, postponed, which was supposed to be held in April. It's going to be somewhere in November. So perhaps there the leadership might, have an opportunity to exchange views, and there is a possibility, perhaps, something, some way forward might be worked out there. At the same time, I think the Russians are trying to reactivate the mechanism, which is, India, Russia, China mechanism, the trilateral dialogue which they used to have. So they are also trying to, reactivate that. I don't know whether it will be successful or not, or whether they'll be able to do it or not. We'll have to see that. As far as the, SCO's background is concerned, if you look at the creation of SCO, there has been a lot of expertise and experience of solving border disputes, and especially with Central Asia. So perhaps that kind of institution, Amar Bilal Sufi has also pointed towards that aspect. That kind of forum or that kind of institution can be instrumental in facilitating some kind of engagement between the two major countries of the major members of the organization. So perhaps, sort of if seriously thought about it and some effort is put in, something can be worked out in that direction. As far as the US involvement in creating fissures and exploiting situation in Xinjiang is concerned, I think there has been no doubt about that. And this is not something new. It has been, they have been doing it for years now. Look at Madam Rabia. She is like, there the Uyghur world leaders are there. They are being supported. They are being, funded. And they and their allies are all instrumental in this effort. There are like, many European countries which have major offices of the dissidents from Xinjiang. So I think, but the Chinese have, I think, have understood the channels. They have understood the sources of instability, and they have been able to clamp them in the recent past, and they are, I think, doing it quite successfully.
Thank you, sir. Now we may have this last round of questions. So this is a question from Abdul Basit. He's asking, how far will US use India to be in conflict with China or continue this standoff? And in case the conflict continues, will US be able to help India in such a grid? And he's seeing an alienation of India in South Asia. And the another question is from Mohammad Sarmadzia. He's asking, how do you see the role of Five Eyes and the Quad in this conflict? I think he's asking about the question of intelligence sharing and the thing about that Praveen Saini talked about, this space Silk Road or the use of digital infrastructure for military use. So if you can comment on that as well, either of you. General Lodi, you may start, please.
Thank you. First, as far as American prowess to use India for their interest is not very big for the time being, for the reason not that Americans would not like it, but for the reason that Indians are not that naive that they allow themselves to be used by any other power for their interest. Of course, anything where the interests coincide, for example, in this Chinese case, but Indians also know that if there is a escalation, they will have to bear the brunt. They will have to face the consequences. They have seen that thing, such things happening in other countries. Pakistan is one example. So I don't think that Indian leadership will allow itself to be used in that manner unless they go blind as far as their standoff with China is concerned. So Americans will try to do that. They might have already done that, but I see that that will not materialize, because once I see that Americans have failed to use India and Afghanistan the way they wanted to, so I am quite confident that they will not be able to use India in any other scenario. I'm more inclined to reiterate what I said earlier, that with the passage of time, the moment Indians get some good leadership, they might revert to their old non-alignment or less alignment policy, and they might integrate with the region more. As far as this 5-eye, which from it was 2-eye, 3-eye, and now it has gone to 4-eye and 5-eye. I think this was explained very well by our guest from India. He said that it is not easy as far as this interoperability is concerned, as far as yes, intelligence sharing has a number of facets. Nowadays, there's a lot of intelligence sharing which is instrument based, technical, based. So I don't know how far they have the understanding of doing that, because there are certain, you can say, special things with Americans which they don't share with anyone. They haven't shared it probably with Israel. They might have shared it so far. There are certain cutting edge technologies which they are not ready to share with, and I don't think they will do it India very soon, unless Indians go very close to them and all that. So yes, there will be some intelligence sharing. There will be some other, 5-eye usages, common usages. but I don't think a very deep and intricate sort of relationship developing very soon. Thank you.
I would entirely endorse, what General Sahab has said. I think there is a limit to India's cooperation with the US, and they do understand that, because there is a price, if they get too close to the US and try to pursue their agenda in the region, then they have to pay a price. Or if they just want some kind of a special favors from the US, even then they have to pay a price. So if the Indians are ready to pay that price, which is usually very, hefty for any country to pay, then perhaps they will be able to get some specific, significant assistance from the US. Otherwise, India has been trying to create an image globally of its power, of its potential, which is far from its actual size. So similarly, they are trying to create kind of an impression about their relations with the US in order to influence their neighbors and try to present to the world that how closely they are working with the US. In reality, the Americans are very frustrated with what Indians have been promising and delivering. So, and there is a huge gap. So that gap, I think, would remain like that, and there will be frustration on part of the US as far as their expectations from India are concerned, and the Indians are going to present the same rosy picture of their, good hunky-dory relationship with the US. And regarding the second question, I think that, the Americans might provide them with the, satellite facilitation in terms of, this region and mapping the area and providing them the real-time information, because the Indians lack that kind of, facility. So perhaps that could be one area of their cooperation specific to this situation.
Thank you, sir. So we have a couple of minutes for the last question. So I'm directing this to General Lodhi. Sir, do you think India's military assertiveness in this region is merely a result of BJP's hyper-nationalist Hindutva ideology, or you think that BJP has raised the bar for even the other governments, and you think the aggressiveness will continue even if there is a change of government? Do you think BJP has transformed the essence of India for good?
Thank you. As far as the military assertiveness is concerned, or you can say bullying attitude is concerned, I think that Indians have a history, irrespective whether whosoever is in power. But yes, BJP has given it further fillip, and they are doing it more openly, and no bones about it, and they are not hiding their intentions. That is the only difference. But of course, they have also become more aggressive. But I think now whatever BJP is political aspirations are, their military cannot meet up to that. They cannot come up. I mean, I would say they are trying to punch above their weight, because they need to understand that Pakistan is because Pakistan is one of the main victims, although they have soured relations with all around. But Pakistan is the main victim. They need to realize that Pakistan is a nuclear power, and they can only as their aggressiveness can go up to a certain extent, and beyond that it will not be possible. So their military aggressiveness or assertiveness will not make a political change in the region as far as Pakistan is concerned. But Pakistani leadership needs to see the things more closely, and I would say that if we have to learn deterrence, that how it works, if we should learn from North Korea, if we should learn from Iran, although they do not have the arsenal and the capacity which we have, but still just see that how did they stand up to the bullying of Americans once it came to that. We probably are more defensive in our attitude, and this defensive attitude is costing us dearly on 2-3 accounts. One, that the atrocities on the Kashmiris are increasing with each passing day, and secondly, we keep on complaining that why the world is not getting sensitized to this problem. One of the factors is the aggressive attitude of India and defensive attitude of Pakistan. If Pakistan acquires equally offensive attitude, excuse me, then probably the world will get alarmed that two nuclear powers are now trying, they are at face to face. Probably the world will come running that what is wrong? Why are you doing all that? I think our leadership need to understand the nuances of deterrence and how it works. I am a very small person to say that they do not understand. They must be doing it very well. But I would suggest that the political and military leadership must sit on the table, review their deterrence policy, and see why it is not working. Because one thing I can tell you, it is not working. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all of you. There are also some questions pouring in, so we are really sorry that we do need to wrap up now. The time flew by, and this was a terrific discussion. Now I request Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi for the concluding remarks. Sir, are you there? Ambassador Naqvi. I think he has left the conversation, or there's some problems.
I think he's there, but there's some technical problem because we can see his picture.
Oh. So Riaz, you can make the concluding remarks.
Closer.
All I have to say is that the presentation was terrific, and everyone, I think, covered all aspects. And the questions, I think, they were really interesting, and they tried to cover all aspects, including the aspect of Russia as well. So thank you, all of you. Thank you for questions, and thank you, sir, General Naeem Lodi and Dr. Fazlur Rahman, and also thank you to Amar Bilal Sufi and Pravin Soini. Thank you all for tuning in. The video will be uploaded to the CIS's website, presumably in a day or so, or it will be available on CIS's Facebook page. So if you missed the beginning and want to see it again, you can just check our website. Please, everyone, stay safe and stay healthy. We are now adjourned.
Allah Hafiz. Allah Hafiz. Thank you, CISS. Thank you.